Aloha everyone and welcome to another Tinkers Academy video. I'm your host Kay Elmer and this video is a further installment in the video series Quantum Studies Explained. This series is centered around the studies that have been commissioned by Leela Quantum Tech and published at the International Association for Quantum Technology and Frequency Medicine. The reason of the series, this video series, is because there's so many studies that have been completed now and published by all sorts of different institutions and scientists and in universities and so forth that it's really kind of difficult to just look at any one particular study and try to really understand, what's going on with quantum energy and how does that affect us. So what I've tried to do is group these in like-for-like type of groupings, and then taking a look at each group of studies to kind of just say, hey, what's really going on here, and how does it affect us? So what I've done is basically I've put together, these studies, I've grouped them up. I put each separate group into Google Notebook LM, which is an AI, and which then produces a short overview, a video that kind of just explains what's in those studies, right? So it kind of gives you a really high-level overview, so you get a really good idea of okay, what does this mean, right? In terms of what did they find? And then the next thing I try to provide in this series is some context around that, because a typical study is simply, scientists asking a question or coming up with an idea, and then creating the experiment to kind of validate their idea or test their, or provide the answers to their questions. And then they tell you what the data is, but there's very little context as to what does that really mean, for overall. And so that's kind of really where I'm trying to make, kind of bridge that concept here with this video series. And the last thing, because, in the age of AI, because of these studies that I'll be covering are in an AI notebook, you, the viewer, can actually go and interact with the content that I'm making the video about. So, unlike in the past, if you watched a video and you had a question, you would type it into the video comments and most likely not get an answer. Here, you can literally go straight into the studies and you can actually ask questions and the AI will read the study for you and answer your questions. So if you want to actually download the study, they are located at the International Association of Quantum Technology and Frequency Medicine, and I'll show you how to find them right now. Or you can just go ahead and click on the notebook link in the video description below, and you can go to the AI notebook and then you can ask it questions. So either read them yourself or you can use the AI to ask questions. So now, if you wanted to actually download them, or let me show you what studies I'll be covering in this video, then you just go to the International Association, Quantum Technology and Frequency Medicine. You click on Go to Studies, and if you scroll down a little bit, you kind of get this little table of contents things. And so right here, today's video is going to be on cellular health, the effects of quantum energy on cellular health. And so if you go right here, you can download any one of the studies that I'm going to cover today as a group. And so what I've done here is in this section called cellular health, I've pulled 5 studies I've kind of broke it into 2 groups, because cellular health, when they did these studies, they did a lot of studies just on blood cells, like blood morphology. And then they did 5 studies just on regular cells of the human body. So you got blood cells and then regular cells, And so I kind of separated out the blood cells. That'll be in the next video. And this video is going to be specifically on human cells. So it's all right in here in this section. You can kind of, if you want to download it, you can go ahead and do that as well. But these are so I pulled 5 studies, specifically mitochondrial studies and wound healing studies and so forth, out of this section of the library, basically, and put them into a Google Notebook. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. Now, what are the effects of quantum energy on human cells? And that's the big question here. So let me play you the Google Notebook AI overview first, and then let's get into the context. So here you go.
Today, we're diving into a series of scientific studies that really push the boundaries of what we think we know about biology. They explore a pretty wild idea. So let's just get right into it.
So here's the central question, and it's a big one. Is it possible for our biological systems, right down to the cellular level, to be influenced by something that isn't physically there? It's a mind-bending thought for sure.
Okay, so there's actually a scientific term for this. It's called non-local interaction. The basic idea is that 2 biological systems can affect each other, even with empty space between them. It's a pretty bold hypothesis, so let's take a look at the actual data and see how they tested it. So, how do you even begin to test an idea this big? Well, the researchers started at the most fundamental level you can imagine, the energy that actually powers our cells. They zeroed in on something called ATP. You've probably heard of it. It's basically the energy currency for our cells. Think of it like the battery pack that runs everything in your body, from muscle movement to just thinking. Because it's used and regenerated constantly, it's a perfect way to measure any changes in how busy our cells are. And you have to appreciate the rigor here. They didn't just run the test once and call it a day. They set up a whole series of double-blind experiments. Each one was more refined than the last, stripping away variables to get a really clean, clear picture of what was going on. And this is where it gets really interesting. In that final, super-controlled experiment, the data showed that the treated cells cranked out between 20 and 29% more ATP. I mean, think about that. A jump in raw cellular energy that big could have huge implications for, well, everything. Okay, so the data suggests more cellular energy. But the next logical question is, what does that energy actually do? Does it translate into better performance? Well, the next set of experiments looked at exactly that by focusing on wound healing. For these studies, again, all double-blind, they basically set up what you could call a healing race. They took human skin cells, fibroblasts, and split them up. You had your control group, just chilling under normal lab conditions, and then the treated group, which was exposed to the technology from a distance.
Just look at this timeline. It shows the results from one of the experiments so clearly. At the start, they make a little scrape in the layer of cells. Now look at this. By hour 38, the treated cells have totally closed the gap. But the control cells, even at 62 hours, they're still working on it. The difference is pretty dramatic.
And this wasn't just a one-off fluke. They ran this experiment 5 times over an entire year. And every single time, they saw a major speed up in the healing rate, sometimes up to 100% faster. That's literally twice the speed. All right, so we've seen these reported effects on cell energy and repair in a lab. But what about inside a living, breathing human being? The next step was a pilot study that zoomed in on the source of all that cellular energy, our mitochondria. This study followed the mitochondrial health of human subjects. And if you think of ATP as the energy currency, then mitochondria are the tiny little power plants inside our cells that generate almost all of it. So yeah, their health is pretty directly tied to our overall health. Now, the study tracked people for 90 days, and the results over time are fascinating. At first, around day 7, they actually saw an initial stress response. The report suggests this might just be a normal adaptation phase, like when you start a new workout program. But then, by day 30, things started trending in a positive direction, leading to some really sustained improvements by the 3-month mark. Okay, to really get the next slide, we need a quick primer on ROS. That stands for reactive oxygen species. These are just natural byproducts from when our cells make energy. But if you get too much of it, it's like cellular rust that causes damage. So generally speaking, lower ROS means your mitochondria are working a lot more efficiently. And here is the payoff. This chart shows that after 90 days, those ROS levels dropped, and not just a little. They dropped significantly. This is a huge clue that the mitochondria weren't just working. They were working smarter, producing less of that damaging rust. The researchers also looked at something called the mitochondrial network. I love the way the source material put this. They described healthy mitochondria as social organisms that need to connect with each other to work properly. When they're all fragmented and isolated, that's a sign of dysfunction. So keeping that social organism idea in mind, the pilot study reported that after 3 months, the mitochondrial network was significantly improved. This suggests that the little power plants in the cells weren't just more efficient, they were also better connected and working together as a team. Okay, let's take a quick breath. We've looked at 3 different areas: cellular energy, cell repair, and mitochondrial health in humans. Let's pull it all together and see what it looks like. So, when you lay all the data out like this, a pretty consistent story starts to take shape. It starts in the lab, with cells producing way more energy. Then, that extra energy seems to translate into a real-world benefit, like faster healing. And finally, when you look inside the human body, you see signs of healthier, more efficient, better connected mitochondria. It's a pretty compelling chain of evidence. And it's not just us piecing this together. Dr. Robert Schaaf, who is the lead investigator on 2 of these studies, said the results are interesting and warrant further study. He also talked about how exciting it was just to build new ways to even investigate these kinds of possibilities. And that really brings us to the final thought here. The data we've walked through today is from the very edge of biological science, and it leaves us with this huge, fascinating question. What could it mean for our health, for healing, for human potential, if our biology is connected in ways we're only just beginning to wrap our heads around?
Okay, so that was the overview. And so what I want to get into next now is just to give some context, okay? So the context here is that what I've tried to do with this series is really start at the smallest particle, in terms of quantum energy. How does it affect us? So I started with water. That's the very first video of the series, is what are the quantum effects on water? And then, kind of understanding what's going on there. So the next step up from water, which is the water molecules, right? I wanted to kind of take it up from molecules, and then let's take it up into the next level up, which is intracellular components, right? So if you take a look at a typical diagram of a human cell, there's all of these different components within the cell. And so the study then, what it did was when it actually exposed cell cultures or human cell cultures to quantum energy, they really focused in on this particular piece right here, the mitochondria. And the reason it was so important is because they refer to it as the powerhouse of the cell, and that really is what it does. Of all of the different things within the cell, and remember now there's water in here, right? And so there's all this stuff is floating in fluid, which is water, but not like water out of a tap. Some people refer to it as exclusion zone water, structured water, that sort of thing. But there is basically structured water that all this stuff floats into. And one of the little tiny pieces of it, the little critters here, are called mitochondria. And that's what the studies had focused in on, because that is literally the most important part of the cell. Without energy, without the cell being able to absorb food, in the form of glucose, it wouldn't be able to produce energy for you to be alive. And so obviously all the other components are important, but this is really the key one, was they focused in on the mitochondria within the cell, and that's kind of what they were studying. Okay, so then the next thing here that's important is to understand, when they say ATP production. Okay, so ATP is what is powers us. That's literally how glucose, which is this is called the cellular respiration, is how your body converts food to energy. So the glucose is the food, and it comes into the cell, and it goes through a Krebs cycle, and then it just creates chemical energy, which then turns into something called the electron transport system, and that's what produces the ATP. And so that's kind of what's all happening here, for at the the biochemistry aspect of the study. So this is the context on why I chose these studies, and secondly, in the progression of the studies that I'm going in. So context, okay. When I take a look at this, what the studies found, first of all, they're just unbelievable results, okay. But when you take a look at what the study found, you'll look at just like the main four things that they found, which was they saw that there was an increase in ATP, that there was an increase in the efficiency of the way that the cellular respiration process was working. Okay, they looked at the fact that there was greater recovery, which was the wound healing, because of the and they didn't really attribute it to the higher ATP. Those were separate studies, but you can say, yeah, absolutely, you could see why that there's wound recovery can literally double in speed, because you've got extra energy going into those cells, obviously, right? And then it also was really kind of a side note, but that the reactive oxygen species decreased significantly. So when you take a look at the notebook, and what I want to kind of point out here is, if you go into, like, let's say the last study here was on water, but if you go into the the actual notes, the video description notes, you'll see right here the link. I'll put a link in every one of these, which will say quantum effects on whatever notebook. Okay, so if you click on the notebook, so now this notebook is the quantum effects on human cells that I created in Google Notebook. And so this is where you can just simply ask questions. And I think one of the most important things about context here, in terms of like, okay, what is the effect of quantum energy at a cellular, or actually at a subcellular level, which is what this what this video is about. What is the context here? What is it doing? It's increasing our energy, and that because that energy is increasing, right, then the cells work better. And I really think when it comes down to that, really what it comes down to is when I ask this question of the of the studies. These are all the studies. I asked it a question. I said, what are the common effects, beneficial effects from all of the studies together? When you take a look at all 5 studies, well, right off the bat, it says you get more ATP. But I think right here, hidden in this one little bullet, is the answer to what is quantum energy doing at a subcellular level, and it's called enhanced efficiency. It's improving mitochondrial function. Okay, and I think what's even more amazing was that it mentions here about the reactive oxygen species stress down here where it lowers it, but it also says that right here the efficiency was due to the ATP synthesis rate, which showed signs of recovery, enhanced healing, right? So that means that it became, the cell becomes more efficient. The way the cell works becomes more efficient. It has greater energy from quantum energy, and then what happened was that the way that the mitochondrial function was that there was a link to the overall shift towards an oxidative energy metabolism, which is mitochondrial produced energy, which is highly efficient compared to the less efficient glycolic energy production. So bottom line is, when you take a look at what are these studies are telling us, okay, is that they're telling us that when you are exposed to quantum energy, very similarly to the idea of what happened to the water when it was exposed to quantum energy. Well, in the case of the water basically neutralized and created a homeostasis environment, right? It became basically it kind of just changed from whatever state that it was. The water then became like essentially the perfect water for for our biological beings. Now, when you actually expose the human cells, which also contain water, then the same thing is happening here. But now we're actually seeing why it happened. It's because the process of ATP production, or the function of the cell and how the cell works, became more efficient, right? There was less stress on it. The network improved, as noted in the overview, and it became more efficient. And because it was more efficient, it could produce more energy. And I think that really, it's just an amazing outcome, because the studies were, as noted in the overview, they were the gold standard of science. They were done by highly reputable scientists, not just, there's Dr. Schief at the University of Tulsa, but there was another institute in Europe that did, these 5 studies were not just done by one individual. They were done at an accredited university. They were done under the gold standard of randomized double-blind placebo control. And they were also done over and over. They were repeated. And that's the hallmark of science, is that if you can't repeat and replicate your results, then the study is invalid. It's just a one-off, right? But they repeated it over and over and over and continued to get the same results. So there literally is the gold standard of research. And so they discovered that quantum energy, affects us at a subcellular level that improves the efficiency by which our cells function. And then from that, there's, of the 37.2 trillion cells in our bodies, okay, if you get all of them working more efficiently, try to imagine how that replicates it out, going out from subcellular to cellular to, that sort of thing, tissue and so forth, and how that is just incredibly beneficial to our overall health in every aspect of our health. And I think that's the key takeaway here, is that the efficiency is what's increasing. The mitochondrial efficiency at a subcellular level is what's really driving these incredible benefits that we're seeing. So when I get into the blood cell studies next, you'll see how that affects the blood cells. Because all of this is happening at the subcellular, then when we look at the blood cell studies, we'll look at the cellular level. And I think that's where we really start getting a really good picture of what's happening here. So you got homeostasis, you've got greater efficiency, which creates more energy, which does stuff like wound healing faster. And then we'll take a look at the next one here in the next video. So before I leave, though, I want to give you one more thought. And it's an elephant in the room. Because what's interesting is that, you've got these hardcore scientists, right? And they're, academia, and they've been commissioned to run these studies. And so what and their terminology is quite interesting, because they're referring to quantum energy as quantum field modulation, and then they're referring to quantum entanglement as non-local interaction. But the elephant in the room that I want to point out from these 5 studies is that they proved that quantum energy exists. It's a huge deal. I mean, they're basically have done the experiments at the gold standard level of scientific research that proves quantum energy is real. Okay, and in the world of physics, right? How many of your doctors and scientists are going to acknowledge that there's some woo-woo magic energy that floats everywhere, that's around all of us all the time, and it affects our biology? I mean, where have you ever heard that before? And it just, it's outside of our current understanding of physics. It's outside of our current understanding of health and biology and all of that stuff. But guess what? These 5 studies and these incredible scientists who did this work, and it's all published and it's all transparent and available for anyone to read, proved that there is such a thing as quantum energy, and it actually has a real, tangible, physical, biological effect on living organisms. And even more incredible, that there is the ability for this energy to have a non-local interaction. Right. And so if you get into physics, right, you'll understand, quantum entanglement and all that. But this is not particle physics anymore. This is an entirely new. And I think that, it just blows my mind that how this is not on the front page of Science Direct or ResearchGate. And, it's how it's not being covered. It's just mind blowing, because what these studies have done has opened up an entire new world, what I call it quantum physics 2.0. We are now, right, it's kind of in my mind, a rediscovery of ancient knowledge. But in our modern times, in this year, 2025, we now have the evidence, the scientific proof that quantum energy exists, and that it can affect us, right, or anything from hundreds, if not thousands of miles away. And how in the world does that work? Question mark. We haven't figured that one out yet. And then also, too, if that can affect us from hundreds or thousands of miles away, what else can do that? And there's so many more questions now. But in my mind, that these 5 studies, what the most important thing out of these 5 studies was the demonstration of how quantum energy is incredibly stimulating in terms of the efficiency of our subcellular processes. And secondly, quantum energy exists, and that it can happen at a distance unrelated to particle physics. So, it's just amazing nerd stuff, but I just wanted to share that because it's the elephant in the room that, these guys try to, the scientists kind of dance around, and they don't want to really go too far out there because it's so wild. So they're giving it these weird terms in the studies, but that's what it comes down to, So if you listen to how Leela explains it, they use the words quantum energy, they use the word quantum entanglement, but the scientists, you can tell it's kind of humorous where they don't want to say those words and they're using different words. So, but that's what they're saying. They're saying quantum energy exists. So pretty wild, huh? So that's the elephant in the room, and that is the takeaway on the quantum effects of human cells. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you can watch the next one too on blood cells. If you want to find me, I'm at the Tinkers Academy. There's a link to ask questions in the video description below. As I noted, you can go to the notebook and ask away. And if you want to, download any of the studies, the link to that as well. Now, if you want to discuss any of these findings, or you want to discuss anything, or you want to find me, I'm in the quantum, Telegram groups, and more than happy to answer questions and dialogue over there. So anyway, thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope you found it interesting. Have a great day. Aloha.